Hey guys, welcome to Modern JavaScript from the Beginning. This is not a course on frameworks or libraries or how to use jQuery. This is a course on learning and building things with pure modern JavaScript. So who is this course for? It's for absolutely everyone. We're starting from absolute scratch. The first section is all about fundamentals like data types, arrays, loops, functions, all the basics that you need to know, and explained in a way that doesn't suggest that you know anything about programming. Now, just because the first section is geared towards beginners doesn't mean that this is a beginner's course. From there, we're going to learn all about the DOM, how to manipulate interfaces, events, asynchronous JavaScript with Ajax and Fetch, promises, and other new features. We're going to learn about object-oriented programming, both ES5 prototypes and ES 2015 classes. We'll also learn about things like regular expressions, JavaScript patterns, and much more. Now, I carefully formatted this course in a way that it is modular. It has modular learning sections where we really dig into the code and use the console for output to learn specific aspects of the language. But I also included about 10 different projects that range in size that allow you to build stuff based on what you've learned. So some are very small mini projects, others take up to 12 lectures. The last project will actually be an entire front end to a REST API using no framework whatsoever. In fact, we'll even build a custom HTTP library that we'll build using the Fetch API along with async and await. So why take this course? Well, first of all, you're going to learn modern JavaScript from scratch, and I didn't format this like many other courses out there where it's all older ES5 code and then a little sprinkle of ES6 at the end. You're going to learn the core fundamentals that have been around forever along with the new features. All modern browsers now support 95% of ES 2015, or also called ES6. So things like let and const, arrow functions, template literals, we're going to utilize these features throughout the course. And then when we do get to something that the browser doesn't support, such as ES 2015 modules, I'm going to show you how to compile your code with Webpack and Babel down to something that all browsers can run. Okay, another reason is because frameworks have basically taken over. People are learning frameworks before the actual language. This course will teach you how to build things without React or Angular, and at the same time give you more skills to be able to understand how those frameworks operate. Okay, you're also going to learn your way around the DOM without having to use jQuery. There's almost no need for jQuery anymore. Vanilla JavaScript is more than capable of manipulating the DOM. You'll also learn about structuring and design patterns. So here's a list of some of the major topics that we'll cover in this course. For absolute beginners, we have language fundamentals, then we'll move to DOM manipulation and events with no jQuery, ES5 and ES6 object-oriented programming, asynchronous JavaScript with Ajax and callbacks, as well as newer standards like fetch, promises, and async await, things like error handling, regular expressions, local and session storage, arrow functions, maps and sets, popular JavaScript patterns, and a bunch of projects to go with all of it. So some of the included projects will include a task list with DOM manipulation, as well as local storage to persist the data, a loan calculator, a number guessing game, an object-oriented application on creating book lists. We'll even build a custom HTTP library, first with Ajax and callbacks, and then we'll move on to fetch, promises, and async await. And then we'll move on to building API projects like the GitHub Finder using the GitHub API, a weather app using the Weather Underground API. We'll build a pretty large project using the module pattern, which will track calories. And then we'll build a complete front end to a REST API with ES6 modules using Webpack and Babel. And then along the way, we'll have some mini projects like a Chuck Norris joke generator to look at Ajax and how that works, and external APIs, a profile scroller to give you an example of how to use ES6 iterators, and then we'll build a little state pattern interface where we can switch from, we'll create a Bootstrap theme, and we can switch pages based on the state. All right, so these are some of the things that we'll learn throughout the course. And these other things that listed here are things that we're not going to completely focus on and I'm going to fully explain, but these are skills you may pick up. So more HTML and CSS. We're going to use frameworks like Bootstrap 4, Materialize CSS, Skeleton CSS. You're going to learn more about HTTP requests, GET requests, POST, PUT, delete, REST APIs. We're going to be using something called JSON Server on the last project where we can create a fake REST API for our front end, and we'll build the front end using ES 2015 modules. So we'll be using Webpack and Babel to compile newer features of JavaScript down to ES5. All right, so hopefully you guys enjoy this course, whether you're brand new to JavaScript and programming in general, or whether you're already in the field and you're looking to sharpen your skills. Let's go ahead and get started. So before we get started, I just wanted to mention a couple things about project files and questions for the course. So this course is built of both learning sections and complete projects, and every lecture will contain the project files for that particular video. Now the module learning sections will most likely just be a folder called JS Sandbox with an index.html file and an app.js file. And then the project lectures are incremental, so each video will have the project files up to that lecture, up to that point. Okay, the last video in the series of that project will be the entire application. So like with any course, you may get stuck or you may not understand something fully. And from experience, I can tell you that getting in there and testing and experimenting on your own and trying to research problems will give you the best insight and the best help. So if after a while you still can't find an answer, then leave a question in the Q&A section and include your issue, include the code, maybe a screenshot, and if I can't help from that example, then I may ask you to email me your code for testing. And please don't get offended if I can't get to your question. I literally have 100 questions or more per day added to my caseload, so it's virtually impossible to get to them all. And there's also others that are willing to help, and if you see someone that's asking a question and you know the answer, please don't hesitate to help each other out. Now, as far as updates go, this is a course on a particular language, so there's not going to be as many needed updates as, let's say, a framework that's updated every couple months. But there may be added lectures in the coming weeks and months on things that I want to include, but I didn't get a chance to yet. All right, and I'll try to put newer ES Next features as they get standardized into the JavaScript language. I may also add more projects along the way. So the last thing I want to mention is on the coding style in this course. Now, I carefully created this course to program in a way that teaches, especially in the learning sections. I'm not focused on structure of the file or anything like that, but on the topic at hand that I'm trying to present. So if you're a professional JS developer and you see certain things that you wouldn't do in a production application, it's because it's not a production application, it's a code sample, and it's meant to teach a certain aspect. All right, so try to keep that in mind as you move through the course. Also, practices will get better as the course progresses. Now, there's a million ways to code the same application and everyone's different, and I try to give you diversity and offer different ways to structure your code rather than building the same exact project the same exact way in every lecture. Okay, and if you happen to find any bugs or issues, please report them in the Q&A section on Udemy. All right, guys, so that's all the stuff that I wanted to mention. In the next video, we're going to set up our environment and text editor to start working with JavaScript. All right, guys, so since this is a client-side, regular just JavaScript course, pure JavaScript, there's not too much that we have to do in terms of setting up our environment. You can use a Windows machine, you can use a Mac, you can use Linux, any operating system you want. You can use any browser or text editor, although there are a couple suggestions that I would make. Especially if you're following along with the course and you want to follow every little thing. So what I'm going to be using as a browser is Google Chrome, which is what I would recommend for all web development, and I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code as my text editor, which I would also recommend for just about any type of web development. Now, like I said, we're not going to need any tools except for the last project. The last project, we're going to be using something called ES 2015 modules, which still aren't implemented in the browser, so we need a little help. So we're going to need something called Webpack and Babel to compile our code down to older ES5 JavaScript. So when we get to that last project, we're going to have to do a little more installation. We're going to have to install Node.js because we need npm to install Webpack and all that stuff. All right, but with the exception of that very last project, all we need is a text editor and a browser. So what I'm going to do here is download Visual Studio Code at code.visualstudio.com. It's completely cross-platform. And again, you do not have to use this text editor. It's a recommendation of mine, but you can use whatever you want. You can use Notepad if you want, although that I definitely wouldn't recommend it. So we're going to download that. We'll say open when done. And not only are we going to install it, but I'm going to show you a couple plugins to set up and just a little bit of configuration. All right, and if you want to kind of match the course exactly and follow along exactly, then I would suggest this. So let's click next, and let's just go through this real quick. The folder already exists. That's fine. I already had it installed, so that's why I'm getting that message. And we'll go ahead and click next. And then right here, this is very important. You want to check off this add open with code with both of these check marks. What this does is it'll let you right click on a folder or a file and say open with Visual Studio Code, and it'll open it in that location. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Click next and then install. Visual Studio Code also comes with something called Emmet, which is a way to use HTML and CSS shortcodes. Now, even though this isn't an HTML course, we will be typing quite a bit of HTML, so it's good to have Emmet to use those shortcodes. It makes things quicker. Now, if you're using a different text editor like Atom or Sublime Text or something like that, you can install Emmet as an add-on or as a plugin. Okay, but it's actually default with Visual Studio Code. All right, so now it's installed. I'm going to go ahead and click Finish, and it's going to open it up. All right, so it just opened up some release notes and a welcome page. We can open a file or folder from here. I'm going to just close this welcome page up. And what I want to do is, first of all, go to File and Preferences and then Settings. Now, this is how you configure your text editor or how you change preferences in Visual Studio Code. You use this JSON file. It's just one big file. You can see you can expand things for different categories. And if you want to change something, you just copy that object, that key value pair, and put it over here and save. Now, a couple things I want to do is optimize the text size so that you guys can see it better. So this editor font size right here, what I'm going to do is copy that. Over here, we want to put it into a set of curly braces like that. And I'm going to set the size to 26. Okay, and then if I do Control S or File Save, that'll kick right in. Another thing I want to do is change the tab size. So what I'm going to do is search over here for tab, and this editor tab size, which by default is 4, I'm going to change that to 2 because I think with 4 it spreads your code over a little too far, and I don't like that, so I'm going to change that to 2. And then the last thing I want to change is the word wrap. By default, word wrap is off, meaning that your code will go off screen, and especially where I'm doing a course, I really don't want that. I want you guys to see all the code, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. All right, once I do that, I'll just do Control S, save that, and now I have the settings that I want. All right, so the next thing I want to do is install a couple extensions. So we're going to click this icon, and this shows you a bunch of recommended or suggested extensions. But what I want first is something called Live Server. So I'm going to search for Live Server. And it's this first one here. And what this does is it allows us to open up just a regular HTML file on our local host. So instead of opening it from the file system, it'll open it on, for instance, localhost port 5500. And it also gives us auto load. So every time I save a JavaScript file or the HTML file, it'll auto load. I won't have to go and click the reload button in the browser, which is really nice. Now, if you're using the Atom text editor, there's something called Atom Live Server, which is pretty much the exact same thing, just for that editor. And I'm sure Sublime has one, and other text editors if you're using them. I would definitely suggest it. So I'm going to click install here, and that'll go ahead and install it. And while that's happening, I'm going to go and search for another extension called what is it called? Bracket Colorizer. Okay, bracket pair colorizer. And what this does is it makes bracket pairs a certain color so that you don't get mixed up if you have, for instance, nested if statements. It'll pair the brackets together, which is really helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and install that. All right, and then the last thing I want to install is the JavaScript ES6 snippets, which is right here, JavaScript ES6 code snippets, and that'll just give us some nice IntelliSense with ES6. So we're going to click install for that. Okay, and then once these are done, you can click reload, or just exit the browser and go back in, and those should be all set up. You can see that these 3 extensions are now installed. All right, so let me just give you a quick preview of how Live Server works. So if I create a new folder here, let's just call it project, and we can go and we can right click and say open with code. And now we have the project over here on the left, and I can create a new file. I can call it index.html, and we have Emmet installed by default. Now the key for Emmet is tab by default. So if I do, for instance, h1 tab, it'll give me a pair of h1 tags. I can also do classes and IDs. For instance, I can say hash test tab, and that'll give me a div with the ID of test. If I want to do a class, I can do dot test or whatever I want to call it and tab, and it'll give me the class of test. If I wanted to do an h1 with a class of hello, we could do that. Okay, we can also do an exclamation mark and then tab, and it gives us a basic HTML document with head and body tags, which is really nice and really speeds things up. Now, just to give you an example of how Live Server works, I'm going to go ahead and just put an h1 in here and just say hello and save. And what I could do is I could either open up index.html right from my file system like that, or I could use Live Server by just right clicking and saying open with Live Server, and then that will automatically open up a browser with that file in there. And I can snap this over like that. And now if I go and I edit this and I change this to hello world, and then I just save with Control S, you'll see that it auto updates. Okay, it auto uploads. I don't have to go over and click the reload button, and that works really well for courses like this. All right, you'll see that this is running on my local host, my loopback address, and then port 5500, and then we're in the index.html file. All right, so I think everything is set up for the course, at least for now, until we get to the last project. So in the next section, we're going to start to work with the fundamentals of the JavaScript language. This is going to be great for beginners. You're going to learn all about data types and functions and loops and operators and all that kind of stuff. Of course, if you are a professional JavaScript developer, you probably know most of, if not all of this stuff, but I would suggest watching it as a refresher. If not, just move on to the next section, which is DOM manipulation. All right, thanks guys, and I will see you in the next video.